Rising and high levels of inequality are one of the major long-term challenges for humankind. While the climate crisis as another global challenge is slowly getting the attention it deserves, reducing inequalities is still largely neglected as a structural issue. Nearly half of humanity lives in poverty, while the wealth of the richest 2,755 individuals has grown by over 60% to $13.8 trillion over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. The richest 10% hold 76% of global wealth. On a national level, inequalities threaten social cohesion, the functioning of democracies, and economic growth. On a global scale, inequality jeopardizes poverty reduction and overall well-being for all. As a multidimensional phenomenon, it stifles ecological, social, economic, and other dimensions of development. Not just in the global south. Inequality is deeply interwoven with the challenge of mitigating and adapting to climate change. Societies with high levels of inequality struggle to implement effective and sustainable adaptation measures. Unequal access to education and healthcare is a severe obstacle for social development, especially for the most vulnerable and marginalized groups like women and girls. And income inequality is perhaps the most commonly measured facet of inequality. It is often considered a proxy for other inequalities. Vulnerable and marginalized groups around the globe are especially affected by the nexus of inequality as a structural factor and the associated social, psychological, and health problems. All of this makes tackling inequalities as a structural issue a necessity. Just to be clear, tackling inequalities does not mean establishing equality in all regards. A certain level of inequality is sometimes considered necessary for the functioning of a society. But inequality at such extreme levels is most certainly harmful on its own. Inequality describes the distribution of outcomes, such as income, wealth, or land, as well as the access to opportunities through relevant resources across an entire population. Inequality is an inherently relative measure. Instead of zooming in on the so-called poor, the inequality approach allows us to see a bigger picture. If we want to tackle inequality, we must zoom out to see the lower end as well as the upper end of any given distribution. Inequalities can be measured within countries, between them, or globally. Inequalities within countries consider distribution or access among one country's population. Inequalities between countries can be understood as a comparison of countries based on national averages of GDP or other indices. Global inequalities encompass both within and between country inequalities, and take the population of the entire world as one reference group, regardless of national borders. Inequalities can be depicted vertically or horizontally. While vertical inequality describes the inequality between individuals or households, horizontal inequality presents differences between different societal groups which are characterized by inherent factors like gender, disability, age, geographic location, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, etc. Also, it is important to note that individuals are often exposed to multiple inequalities at the same time, so-called intersecting inequalities. In today's panel discussion, we would like to focus on vertical inequality on a global scale. International cooperation has always focused on particular dimensions of inequality. However, the United Nations 2030 Agenda is the first international development framework that explicitly addresses inequality as a central issue. SDG 10 explicitly aims at reducing inequality within and among countries. thus acknowledging inequality as a structural issue. Furthermore, inequality is connected to one of the leading principles of the agenda: leave no one behind. But even apart from these designated aspects, inequality in all its forms is a cross-cutting issue that runs through the entire agenda. This gives international cooperation a new mandate for reducing inequalities within and between countries. In practice, however, most interventions aim at the reduction of poverty and fail to address the extreme concentration of power, influence, and wealth at the other end. Global inequalities are hardly addressed. By setting this focus, it becomes apparent that tackling inequalities is not self-evident and always a political choice.